That's what we're doing.
Yes, follow up.
Just one quick follow-up. When you're making, I've never been stopping one of these, so I'm asking the questions, I guess, but do you randomly stop the cars, or you stop every car that comes through during that period of time?
What we do is there's 6 stations, both north and south. There's 3 in the north, 3 in the south. And what the officers do, and how this thing looks, if you were to drive through it, how it looks is we have the DWI van, the state DWI van, which is filming all of this. Each car has a camera in it, which is filming the stops in the area in front of them. And what they simply do is we slow them down to 15 miles an hour. And we tell them way ahead of time, oh, by the way, there's a checkpoint ahead, slow down, and then you come close, the checkpoint ahead, slow down to 15. So you're going around 15 miles an hour. As a slot comes open in front of a cruiser, the very next car, as soon as one pulls out, the very next car goes in there if it can fit. Obviously, you can't fit a tractor trailer in because there's not enough room. So as soon as, whenever those slots become available, the next car comes in. So it's done at a random basis. Now, the officer is very primed as to what he has to do. We have a briefing before this event. He's to go make contact with the driver. Keep that stop under 3 minutes, unless, of course, something develops. If the guy's holding a beer and has alcohol in his breath, I can guarantee you the stop will be more than 3 minutes. If you're not doing anything wrong, and you're just in, and they tell you something like, I'm officer so-and-so, you're being stopped for a field sobriety checkpoint, and they're advised of what's going on. If nothing is suspicious, most of them are well under the 3 minutes, and they're off. And that's how they work. And I think by and large, if you go by our surveys, because people do fill them out and send them in, and people would complain if they wanted to. That's not uncommon in police work. People by and large are very positive for these things, and they felt that the limited intrusion that they had, and it was an intrusion, was worth it for the overall goal.
Okay, Representative Fleck and then Representative Scalia.
Chief,
Wait a
I'm
minute. Representative Algren and then
Okay.
Fleck and Scalia, I'm sorry.
Oh, okay. Thank you, Madam Chair, for
Read my
writing
notes.
I'm not sure that Representative Merrill's question was answered in the form at which we were or at least what I was interested in. And I was hoping that you could tell me from your statistics there, how many people from the 274 people that you stopped on the checkpoint status resulted in a DWI arrest versus the chase cars?
Okay, that's why I can. In the checkpoint status alone, 0 DWI arrests. The checkpoint status alone had 5 arrests, none of them DWI. But when I run a checkpoint, this is an overall operation. Those other cars are part of my operation. It's kind of, they're not separate. They go through the same briefing. There's either 2 chase cars, in Michigan maybe 3, and they're given specific instructions, and it is part of the operation. So it's not, I do separate out the members, but it's not separate from the operation. So it is part of my DWI checkpoint. Instead of standing there, they're mobile, but it's still part of the checkpoint. But to specifically answer it, in the checkpoint itself, there was 0. There was 5 arrests, but there was 0 for DWI. But we had DWI with the chase cars, which makes sense because some of the drunk people turn around. That's the whole point of, we would be, as an administrator and law enforcement, we would be negligent to think somebody might not turn around and not be prepared for that.
Yes, I have another question if I might ask. Okay, so the chase cars that we're describing are there at the checkpoints looking for people who are turning around because they've been warned there's a checkpoint? That part, as opposed to a separate patrol that is, because you made mention that you were following cars and
Yeah.
looking for an offense.
Right, because the standard to pull somebody over with the chase car, they have to do a motor vehicle offense, like anyone else on patrol. So, now, does a red flag go up to an officer when he sees somebody go, check one ahead, I'm going the other way? Yes. Is that reason in and of itself to pull the car over? No. You can, it's legal, there's case law on it, we could do that if we wanted to, I don't. Our instructions are, follow the car. Maybe they just didn't want to go through a checkpoint. Maybe they didn't feel like going through a checkpoint. It's still America. Follow the car. Obviously, you're gonna take notice. If they do something wrong that you can articulate to, stop it. So, of those stops, and those are fairly limited, there were only 25 of those the whole time. That was divided between 2 offices in 4 hours. So it's not, you're not stopping every one. So, of those 25, they got some results. So obviously, you have to be prepared for that.
Okay. I just have one more follow-up.
Okay.
In your standards, and I guess as a little comment, I think there's some of us who constitutionally think that perhaps, the following of a vehicle and finding it to be not driving appropriately is perhaps a little more in line with the Fourth Amendment than the standard, let's pull everybody over as long as we have an open slot. But that may, for some, not for all. But I was wondering, what is the limitation to the number of checkpoints that you can set up in a given month or a given day or a given week?
I think the limitation on law enforcement in general is need-based. And if you do follow the Constitution like I do, then it has to be reasonable. So, in Wakefield, do I think it's, in different towns and different dynamics. If I was charged with keeping the people in Portsmouth safe, I might have a different standard, I might have different criteria to go by. It depends on the amount of, but in Wakefield, reasonable. If I did a checkpoint every day of the week, well, obviously, I think that would be unreasonable. So the guide is, there's no specific number, but the Constitution says that it's reasonable. Okay, and that's important if we're all gonna stay reasonable. So do I think once a year for 4 hours in a global campaign to slow down DWI, do I think 4 hours a year fits in the not unreasonable category? Yes, I do. I think 4 hours a year in Wakefield is pretty well not unreasonable. I could see this conversation saying, well, chief, you had 36 of those last year. Don't you think you're overdoing it a little bit? But it's a tough question when you're saying you had 1 last year, and you're looking at 1 again this year. Even 4 or 5 would, for Wakefield, certainly would not be unreasonable if I staggered them to, you could do Memorial Weekend, you could do, there's various dynamics. We could certainly do more of them. Partly is, I'm going by the need of the community and looking at the results and seeing where we're going with it before I do more or do less. So that will remain flexible. But the standard, there's no actual number, but I think it's reasonableness.
Okay, Representative Fleck and then Representative Scowen.
Thank you, Madam Chairman, and thank you, Chief, for providing the information. Getting back to the field sobriety checks, are those done on a random basis, or are those prompted by a probable cause, a suspicion of, or something along that line?
Well, again, inside the checkpoint, and I'll speak to both of them, inside the checkpoint of 284 cars, only 15 of those did the officers say, hey, wait a minute, I think I need to check a little bit further here. Now, when you pull somebody out who's been drinking, they often aren't DWI, because drinking and driving is not against the law. Drinking when you're impaired enough to be arrested is against the law. So you can pull people out who are drinking, and they will pass field sobriety tests. And in all of those cases, all 15 of those people were drinking. They just weren't up to the standard. So it shows you another standard too. You had 15 people that were drinking. None of them were arrested for DWI inside the checkpoint. That means that, you know, you're not all as safe as you think you are. But the standard for arresting a person is pretty high. You have to make some pretty bad mistakes on the field sobriety and have your other indicators get you to the point of getting arrested. But we screened 15 out of the 284. The rest of them said, thank you, have a nice night, and took off.
Just a follow-up to that, though. My question is, really, is it based on just a random check, or does an officer look at the driver and become suspicious of, because of the breath, because of the actions?
Yes. Yes.
Become suspicious of the possibility of somebody who is impaired? Or is it just say, well, I'm going to get 1 out of every 20 or something like that?
It's not random.
Okay.
And if you started doing it randomly, just pulling people out, now you could start arguing, I am searching. We're not doing a search again. And we're not going through, and we're not doing, is there anything in your trunk and empty your glove box? This is not a search. So the only actions that are taken are when the officer has suspicion based on, you smell like a brewery, your eyes are bloodshot, have you been drinking tonight? Well, I've had a few. Okay, would you mind taking a field sobriety test? That's the only way they get out of the car is with suspicion.
Good, thank you.
Okay, Representative Scalia.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Chief, I want to go back to the 3 minutes for a second. You've mentioned that quite a bit, and it sounds very reasonable, sounds far less than if you had a tail light out, for example, and you got stopped. Who came up with the 3 minutes or less?
Actually, that's a great dovetail.
That's a standard set by the Attorney General's office. And it's actually usually a minute and 20 seconds. It's been the average I've seen. I do them throughout the state. But that's the standard that they established. Again, there's a whole set of administrative rules like we haven't seen in law enforcement that really only exist for sobriety checkpoints. There's really nothing else that we do that kind of meets these standards that were set up by the AG's office and vetted through the chiefs.
Thank you.
You just said a magic word. You have administrative rules for these?
We do, we have standards, yeah.
Oh, okay. And you go through...
Well, they're not administrative rules
Okay,
by the
right.
legislature,
Yeah,
but
okay,
yeah,
that's
no,
right.
not standard.
I don't
There are
remember
standards
that.
that we have set, and they're
Yeah.
actually in the packets, and they're available for public. There's an AG's protocol, all of that complies. And you don't get the funding otherwise, and that's the key part. That's where we can make the other departments do the things we want them to do. You gotta follow these standards, otherwise you don't get the funding.
Okay, sounds good. Representative McCarthy.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. Chief, you mentioned just a moment ago that if you smelled beer, or somebody smelled like a brewery, and you said, have you been drinking? What if they answer and say, yes, I'm pretty drunk? Can you use that against them in court, even though they have not been warned of Miranda rights and self-incrimination?
Yes, you can. Again, when you talk to a person, okay, Miranda only applies when you're arrested and in custody. If you're, for example, to illustrate the point, I'll go a little bit outside of this. If I had an officer on patrol who stopped a vehicle just for a tail light, and as he's looking at the tail light, he notices, a bloody shirt hanging out of the trunk. Well, that might raise a little suspicion with an officer. So he asks the driver, what's the bloody shirt? And the driver says, well, I have a dead body in the trunk. Yes, we can use that against him because he had not previously been arrested. He's not, therefore Miranda does not apply, and it is usable. Now take it to our field sobriety stop and say, have you been drinking? Yes, I have. I've had 4 beers at the, the Good and Plenty. And okay, that statement was given freely by the person. He had a choice to say, I'm not going to talk to you. He didn't choose that choice. He chose to say, yes, I've had 4 beers. That statement is usable, and until the point where you get to the point of probable cause that you're going to make the arrest, then Miranda doesn't apply. So all the cursory interactions that police have before arrest with people that is pre-arrest, and Miranda does not apply to that. So that, if that clears it,